a ruthless Lycan King, feared by kingdoms who has never bowed to anyone, suddenly drops to his knees in front of the entire pack. All because of her, the frail, forgotten girl everyone ignored, the one coughing in the shadows, the Omega no one thought was worth a second glance. He could have chosen the strongest, the most beautiful warriors throwing themselves at his feet. But on the night of the Moon Dance Festival, he calls her name. She runs in terror. And when she finally stands before him, trembling, ready to be claimed like all the others, she stops him cold with one quiet demand that exposes his darkest sins and brings the unstoppable king to silence. What did she ask for that made him give away half his empire without a fight? How does a dying girl heal a monster's soul? Only to watch him sacrifice his immortality to save her. And when fate tears them apart, will her final heartbreaking wish leave even the fiercest king utterly speechless? If you've ever cried over a love that defies death itself, if you crave that chest-aching mix of tears, redemption, and undying devotion, stay with me, because this werewolf romance isn't just a story. It's the kind that shatters your heart and puts it back together, stronger, forever changed. Are you ready to feel everything? Let's begin.
Before we continue, please kindly tell us where you are watching from. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We have a wonderful story that will make your day.
Chapter 1. The night the moon chose the forgotten one. The bonfires roared high, painting the clearing in molten gold and shadow. Drums throbbed like a second heartbeat through the earth, and the air carried pine, smoke, and the wild sweetness of night-blooming jasmine. It was the annual Moon Dance Festival, the night the Lycan King traditionally claimed his new Omega in front of the entire pack. A night of raw power, open desire, and unbreakable tradition. King Arik Voss stood on the ancient stone dais, shirtless, the firelight licking across the hard plains of his chest and the dark ink of his royal markings. He was a mountain of a man. Broad shoulders, arms corded with muscle, black hair falling wild to his collar. His eyes, the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes, scanned the line of unmated females with cold indifference. One by one they stepped forward, tall warriors with proud scars, voluptuous she-wolves who moved like liquid temptation, daughters of alphas who offered themselves with practiced smiles and lowered lashes. Each bared her neck in submission, each waited for the growl of approval that never came. The pack watched in breathless silence. Whispers began to ripple. Who would the king choose tonight? Who was worthy? Arik's gaze moved past them all and stopped. At the very edge of the circle, half hidden behind a cluster of laughing youths, stood a small figure wrapped in a threadbare cloak, pale skin almost luminous under the moon, eyes too large for her delicate face, hair the color of winter wheat, falling in thin strands around shoulders that looked as if they might snap under the weight of the night air. Janet, the sick one, the orphan whose lungs rattled with every breath, whose body betrayed her before she'd even reached her 20th year. The one the pack fed out of duty, healed out of pity, and otherwise pretended did not exist. Arik's voice cut through the drums like a blade. Janet of House Grey stepped forward. A collective gasp rose. Someone laughed, an ugly, disbelieving bark, quickly stifled when the king's head snapped toward the sound. Janet didn't move. Her thin fingers clutched the edges of her cloak until the knuckles went white. For a heartbeat, the entire pack seemed frozen. Then she turned and ran, bare feet flashing pale against the dark grass, disappearing into the tree line like a startled deer. Murmurs exploded. What game is this? She's half dead already. Has the king lost his mind? Arik did not flinch. He simply lifted one hand and the drums fell silent. Bring her to me, he commanded quietly, gently. 2 guards moved into the forest. Minutes stretched like hours. When they returned, Janet walked between them, head bowed, trembling so violently her teeth chattered. They stopped at the foot of the dais. The guard stepped back. Arik descended the stone steps slowly, deliberately until he towered over her. Up close, she was even smaller than she'd appeared, barely reaching the center of his chest. Her scent hit him like a drug, faint wildflowers crushed under rain, and beneath it, the unmistakable pull of mate. His mate. The realization slammed into him with the force of a war hammer. Every instinct roared to claim her here now, rip the cloak from her body, press her into the earth, sink fangs and cock into soft, yielding flesh until she carried his mark. and his seed. His body responded instantly, hardening painfully against the leather of his trousers. He reached for her chin, tilting her face up. Tears glistened on her lashes, but her eyes, pale silver like moonlit water, met his without flinching. "You ran," he said, voice low, almost tender. "I thought you were mocking me," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but it carried. The pack heard every word. "I do not mock what is mine." His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "Remove the cloak." A ripple of shock swept the crowd. This was the moment, the public claiming. Tradition demanded she bear herself fully, accept him fully, in front of every witness. Janet's fingers shook as she untied the cord. The cloak slipped from her shoulders and pooled at her feet. She wore only a simple linen shift, threadbare and too large, hanging off narrow hips and collarbones sharp enough to cut. Her body was fragile, ribs faintly visible, breasts small but sweetly curved, waist he could span with both hands. Yet something in the way she stood, spine straight despite the tremor, made Arik's chest tighten. He stepped closer, heat radiating from his skin. One large hand slid to the back of her neck, thumb stroking the spot where his mark would soon bloom. His other hand settled at her waist, pulling her gently against the hard evidence of his need. "Feel what you do to me, little one," he murmured, lips brushing her ear. "I will take you tonight, here now, in front of them all, so no one ever doubts you are my Luna." A soft whimper escaped her, not fear, something deeper, need, longing, pain. But then her small hands came up between them, pressing lightly against his chest. "Wait," she said. The single word stopped him colder than any blade. He drew back just enough to see her face. "Speak." Her chin lifted. That quiet fire he'd glimpsed earlier now burned bright. "I will accept you, my king," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "I will open for you. I will take every inch of you into my body and wear your mark with pride. But only if you give 70% of your personal wealth to the widows of this pack." A stunned hush fell. "The widows," she continued, "whose mates you killed in conquest, whose homes and lands you seized, whose children go hungry while your coffers overflow. Give it to them. Restore what was taken. Then I am yours." Arik froze. Every eye turned to the shadowed edges of the clearing, where the widows stood. Older women in patched dresses, faces lined with grief and years of scraping by. They had come only because tradition demanded it. Now they stared, hardly daring to breathe. Arik's mind raced. 70%. Castles. Gold. Lands won in blood. Everything that proved his dominance, his unbreakable strength. He looked down at the fragile girl in his arms, his mate, who had nothing, asked for nothing for herself, and yet demanded justice with the courage of 1,000 warriors. Something cracked open inside his chest, an ancient wall he hadn't known was there. He sank slowly to one knee before her. The pack gasped again, this time in disbelief. Arik took her small, cold hand in both of his massive ones. "It is done," he said, voice rough with an emotion he could not name. "All of it. Tonight. The scribes will draw the papers before dawn. The wealth is theirs." Then quieter meant only for her. "And you? You are mine." He rose, sweeping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Her head fell against his shoulder, exhausted but radiant. The pack erupted, not in mockery, but in a roar of stunned joy. Widows wept openly. Warriors pounded fists to chests in respect. Arik carried her toward the royal tent at the edge of the clearing, the crowd parting like water. Inside, furs covered the ground. Lanterns cast golden light over silks and velvet. He laid her down gently, following her body with his own, caging her carefully between his arms. She was shaking again. "Janet," he whispered, brushing hair from her face, "look at me." Silver eyes met storm gray. "This is your first time," he said, not a question. She nodded, biting her lip. He kissed her forehead, then her eyelids, then the corner of her trembling mouth. "Then we go slow." His voice was gravel and velvet. "Keep it wide for me, little one, I will be gentle." Large hands slid down her body, mapping every fragile curve with reverence. When he parted her thighs, she tensed. "Just breathe," he murmured against her throat. "I won't hurt you, I swear it on the moon itself." His fingers found her slick heat, stroking softly until she arched with a broken moan. Only when she was writhing, begging in soft whimpers, did he settle between her legs, thick, heavy, impossibly hard against her entrance. He pushed in slowly, inch by agonizing inch, watching her face for any sign of pain. Tears slipped down her temples, but she clutched his shoulders and whispered, "More. Please." When he was fully seated inside her tight, welcoming heat, he stilled, forehead pressed to hers, breathing ragged. "You feel like salvation," he rasped. Then he began to move, long, deep strokes, gentle but relentless, building her pleasure until she shattered around him with a cry that sounded like his name and prayer combined. He followed moments later, spilling inside her with a guttural groan, fangs grazing but not yet breaking her throat. After he held her close, wrapping furs around her cooling body, kissing the sweat-damp hair at her temple. "Sleep, my Luna," he whispered. "Tomorrow the world changes." Outside, the pack celebrated late into the night. Inside, the fierce king cradled his fragile mate and felt, for the first time in centuries, something dangerously close to peace. But in the quiet, Janet's breathing hitched, a wet, rattling sound that made Arik's arms tighten around her. She was still sick. And time, he realized with sudden piercing dread, might be the one enemy he could not defeat. Chapter 2. The Mark That Healed a Kingdom. Dawn crept through the silk walls of the royal tent in soft rose and gold, painting warm stripes across the furs where Arik and Janet lay tangled together. He had not slept, not once. All night he had held her, listening to the fragile rhythm of her breath, feeling the faint flutter of her pulse beneath his fingertips. Every time her lungs hitched with that wet, rattling sound, his arms tightened around her, as if he could shield her from the sickness itself. Janet stirred now, a quiet sigh escaping her lips. Her lashes lifted slowly, revealing those pale silver eyes still hazy with exhaustion and wonder. "You're watching me," she whispered, voice hoarse from crying out his name hours before. "I'm memorizing you," Arik answered, low and rough. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, then down the delicate column of her throat where his mark would soon bloom. "In case the moon decides to steal you away before I'm ready." A sad little smile touched her mouth. "You speak as if I'm already gone." "You're not," he said fiercely, "not tonight, not ever if I have any say." He pressed his lips to her forehead, then her temple, then the corner of her mouth. Soft, reverent kisses that tasted of salt and lingering pleasure. Janet's small hand slid up his chest, fingers threading through the dark hair there, and he felt her heart quicken against his ribs. Outside, the pack was already gathering. He could hear the low murmur of voices, the scrape of boots on frost-kissed grass. Today he would keep the promise he made under the moon. Arik rose first, every inch the king again, broad, commanding, lethal. He dressed in black leather and silver clasps, but when he turned back to Janet, his expression softened. He lifted her carefully, wrapping her in one of his own heavy cloaks lined with wolf pelt. She looked impossibly small inside it, swallowed by fur and his scent. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "Not today," he said simply, and carried her out into the morning light. The clearing had transformed overnight. Long tables groaned under the weight of breakfast feasts, but every wolf stood the moment Arik appeared with Janet cradled against his chest. Silence fell like snow. He stepped onto the dais once more. This time the scribes waited with parchment and quills. Behind them stood the widows, 23 women in simple gray dresses, eyes wide with disbelief. Arik's voice rang clear across the clearing, deep enough to vibrate in bones. "By right of conquest, I claimed lands, gold, and homes that once belonged to fallen warriors. By right of mate bond, I now return them." He nodded to the head scribe. The man stepped forward, voice trembling as he read aloud the decree. 70% of the royal personal fortune, castles in the north, vineyards in the south, mines rich with silver, transferred immediately and irrevocably to the widows and their children. Gasps turned to sobs. One older woman, white-haired, face carved deep with grief, fell to her knees. Others followed. Janet lifted her head from Arik's shoulder. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. She reached out a thin hand toward the widows. One by one, they came forward, pressing kisses to her fingers, whispering blessings through tears. "You gave us back our lives," the white-haired woman choked out. "We will never forget, little Luna." Arik watched it all with an expression no one had ever seen on his face before, something fierce and tender and humbled all at once. When the last document was signed and sealed, he turned to the pack. "Behold your Luna," he declared, Janet of House Grey, the heart that reminded a king what mercy feels like. A roar went up, fists pounding chests, howls rising to the sky. Not duty, not tradition, genuine joy. Later, when the sun climbed high and the pack dispersed to begin the massive transfer of wealth, Arik carried Janet back to their tent. She was trembling again, but not from cold. "They love you already," he murmured, laying her down among the furs. "They love what you did for them," she corrected softly. "No." He knelt beside her, large hands framing her face. "They love the woman who made me want to be better." His mouth found hers then, slow, deep, claiming in a way far more intimate than any public display. Janet melted beneath him, fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, even as her body reminded them both how fragile she was. Arik pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. "I need to mark you," he said, voice ragged. "Properly. So the bond locks fully. So every wolf in this kingdom knows you are mine, and I am yours." Janet's breath caught. She knew what it meant. His fangs sinking into her throat, venom flooding her veins, binding their souls forever. Pleasure and pain intertwined. "I'm ready," she whispered. He undressed her slowly this time, peeling away the cloak and the thin shift beneath until she lay bare in the golden afternoon light filtering through silk. His eyes devoured her. Every delicate rib, every soft curve, the faint bruises his passion had left on her pale skin the night before. "You are so beautiful it hurts," he rasped. He shed his own clothes with impatient efficiency, revealing the hard, sculpted lines of his body, scars earned in battle, muscles honed by centuries of dominance. When he settled over her, the heat of him stole her breath. His mouth began a worshipful path, lips brushing collarbones, tongue tracing the swell of her breast, teeth grazing a sensitive peak until she arched with a broken moan. Lower still, kissing the trembling plain of her stomach, parting her thighs with gentle hands. "Keep it wide for me, sweet mate," he murmured against her skin. "Let me taste how ready you are." His tongue slid through her folds in one slow, deliberate stroke. Janet cried out, hips lifting instinctively. He held her down with one massive hand splayed across her belly, licking and sucking with devastating patience until she shattered again, thighs shaking around his shoulders, his name a sob on her lips. Only then did he rise, positioning himself at her entrance, thick, hot, pulsing with need. "Look at me," he commanded softly, silver eyes locked on storm gray as he pushed inside, slow, relentless, stretching her until she felt impossibly full. When he was seated to the hilt, he stilled, letting her adjust, letting the bond flare bright between them. "I love you," he said, the words torn from somewhere deep and long buried. "I didn't know I could, but I do." Tears spilled over her temples. "I love you too," she breathed, "even when I thought you were only a dream." He began to move, long, deep strokes that built a fire low in her belly. His hand slid to the crook of her neck, thumb stroking the spot destined for his mark. "Ready?" he asked against her lips. She nodded, tilting her head to bare her throat fully. His thrusts grew harder, more urgent, chasing the peak together. Just as pleasure crested and crashed through her, his fangs sank deep. The pain was sharp, bright, then melted into white-hot ecstasy as venom flooded her veins. Janet screamed his name, body convulsing around him in waves that pulled him over the edge with her. He growled against her skin, hips jerking as he spilled inside her, marking her from the inside out. The bond snapped into place like thunder. Suddenly she could feel him, his fierce protectiveness, his terror of losing her, his awe that she existed at all. And he felt her. Quiet courage, boundless compassion, the ache of knowing her body was failing even as her soul burned bright. They clung together afterward, trembling, sweat-slick and breathless. Arik licked gently at the blooming mark on her throat, sealing it with soft kisses. "My Luna," he whispered over and over, "my everything." Janet smiled against his chest, fingers tracing idle patterns through the sweat on his skin. For a long moment, there was only the sound of their breathing and the distant laughter of a pack finally healing. Then it came, a wet, coughing fit that seized her small frame. She tried to turn away, embarrassed, but Arik held her close, one large hand rubbing soothing circles on her back. When it passed, she pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. A single spot of crimson stained his chest where her lips had been. Blood. Arik stared at it, face going utterly still. Janet touched her mouth with trembling fingers, saw the red, and her eyes filled with quiet sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The mighty Lycan King, who had just given away half his empire without hesitation, felt true fear for the first time in centuries. He pulled her against him again, burying his face in her hair, arms like steel bands around her fragile body. "No," he said fiercely into her neck. "I will not lose you. I swear it on every star in the sky." But even as he spoke, the mark on her throat glowed faintly, and her next breath rattled worse than the one before. Chapter 3. Fever Dreams and Moonlit Promises. The spot of blood on Arik's chest looked small, almost harmless, a single crimson petal against the vast landscape of his skin, but to Arik it was a wound deeper than any blade had ever carved. He wiped it away with the edge of his thumb, as though he could erase the truth along with the stain. Janet tried to turn her face into the furs, ashamed, but he cupped her cheek and held her gaze steady. "Don't hide from me," he said quietly. "Not ever." Her lips trembled. "It's getting worse." The words hung between them like frost in winter air. Arik said nothing at first. He simply pulled her closer, tucking her head beneath his chin. One massive hand splayed across her back, as if he could hold her together by will alone. The mark on her throat still glowed faintly with fresh bondlight, warm and golden. But her skin beneath his palm felt too hot, fever already rising. Outside the tent, the pack's celebrations had faded into the soft sounds of a new day. Hammers striking as new homes were planned for the widows, children laughing, wolves singing old songs of gratitude. Inside, time slowed to the rhythm of Janet's shallow breaths. By midday, the fever had claimed her fully. She drifted in and out, murmuring fragments of half-dreams. Her mother's voice calling her name, the cold orphanage floor, the night she had watched the moon dance from the shadows and wished, just once, to be seen. Arik never left her side. He dismissed the council with a single growled command that brooked no argument. Messengers came and went, but he waved them away. Food was brought. He ignored it. The mighty Lycan King, who had once led armies across frozen battlefields without tiring, now sat motionless on the edge of the bed holding his mate's hand as though it were made of glass. When the pack healer, an older woman named Mira with kind eyes and steady hands, arrived, Arik's gaze was sharp enough to cut steel. "Tell me you can fix this." Mira examined Janet gently, listening to her chest, pressing fingers to her throat, checking the glow of the new mate mark. Her face grew grave. "The bond has strengthened her heart," she said carefully. "It is keeping her with us longer than I thought possible. But the sickness in her lungs, it is old, deep. It has been eating at her for years." "How long?" Arik's voice was barely a whisper. Mira hesitated. "Months, perhaps less if the fevers keep coming." The word struck him like a physical blow. His shoulders, always unyielding, seemed to curve inward for a single heartbeat before he straightened again. "Then find a way to give her years," he said, "whatever it costs." Mira bowed and left, promising to consult ancient texts and distant healers. Night fell. The tent was lit only by a single lantern and the silver spill of moonlight through the open flap. Janet woke briefly, lucid for the first time since morning. Her eyes found Arik immediately. "You haven't slept," she murmured, reaching up to touch the shadow of beard along his jaw. "I don't need sleep," he answered. "I need you breathing." A faint smile curved her lips. "You gave away half your kingdom today. It wasn't mine anymore the moment you asked for it." She studied his face in the dim light, tracing the fierce lines softened only for her. "You are not what I expected a king to be. And you," he said, voice low and rough with emotion, "are everything I never knew I was missing." He lifted her carefully, settling her against his chest so she could breathe more easily. Her slight weight fit perfectly in the cradle of his arms, as though she had always belonged there. He rocked her slowly, the way a mother might soothe a child, though no one in the pack would ever dare imagine their fierce monarch capable of such tenderness. Janet's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a whisper so small it nearly broke him. "I know." He pressed his lips to her temple. "But you are not alone in it anymore. I'm here. Every breath you take, I take with you." The fever made her skin burn against his, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he held her closer, letting his own strength steady her shaking. When another coughing fit seized her, he supported her through it, murmuring soft words against her hair. Promises, endearments, vows he would keep until his last day. Later, when the coughing eased and she lay limp with exhaustion, Arik carried her to the adjacent chamber where a deep copper bath had been filled with steaming water infused with healing herbs. He undressed her with infinite care, then himself, and stepped into the water with her cradled in his arms. The heat eased the tightness in her chest. She sighed, head falling back against his shoulder. Arik washed her slowly, long strokes of a soft cloth along her arms, her back, her throat, every touch reverent, worshipful. There was nothing demanding in it, only the quiet intensity of a man memorizing the feel of the person he loved most in the world. When she turned in his arms to face him, water lapping gently around them, her silver eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I wish I had met you sooner," she said, "when I was strong enough to run through the forests with you, to dance under the moon without tiring." He brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "You are strong enough for everything that matters. You brought a king to his knees with nothing but truth and courage. No warrior in my army has ever done that." Her smile trembled. "Flatterer." "Truth-teller," he corrected gently. They stayed in the water until it cooled, his hands never ceasing their soothing patterns across her skin. When he finally lifted her out and wrapped her in thick towels, she was drowsy again, fever pulling her under. Back in the furs, he tucked her against his side, her head on his chest directly over his heart. "Listen to it," he whispered into her hair. "It beats for you now. Every thud is a promise. I will find a way. I will fight the moon herself if I have to." Janet's fingers traced lazy circles over his heart. "Just hold me tonight," she breathed. "That's enough." So he did. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the crackle of the brazier and the soft hitch of her breathing. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, silent flakes drifting past the tent flap like tiny white blessings. Just before dawn, Mira returned. Arik met her at the entrance, careful not to wake Janet. "Speak," he said quietly. The healer's face was pale. "I have searched every record we have, my king. There is no known cure for what eats at her lungs. Not in herbs, not in magic, not in any healer's hands." Arik's jaw tightened until it ached. "But," Mira continued, voice trembling, "there is a legend, an ancient ritual spoken of only in forbidden texts. It is said to trade one life force for another, to pull sickness from one body and place it in a willing vessel." Arik went very still. "How certain is the legend?" "Not certain at all," Mira admitted. "It has not been attempted in 1,000 years. And the price?" She swallowed. "The vessel must be strong enough to bear it. Immortal blood helps, but even then, it may kill them both." Arik looked back at Janet, sleeping fitfully in the lantern glow, cheeks flushed with fever, lips parted as she fought for each breath. "Prepare everything you need," he said, voice steady as iron. "I will pay any price." Mira bowed and left. Arik returned to the bed, sliding in behind Janet and pulling her back against his chest. He wrapped one arm around her waist, the other cradling her head, and pressed his lips to the fresh mate mark on her throat. "I will not let you go," he whispered into her skin, so low only the moon could hear. "Not without a fight." Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, the Lycan King held his fragile Luna close and made plans to bargain with fate itself. But in the quiet hours before morning, Janet's breathing grew shallower still and the fever showed no sign of breaking. Chapter 4: The King on His Knees. The snow kept falling, thick and relentless, as if the sky itself mourned what was coming. Arik stood alone on the highest balcony of the royal keep, wind whipping his black cloak around his legs. Below, torches flickered along the newly rebuilt widow cottages, warm lights in the storm, proof that Janet's single demand had already begun to change the kingdom. Yet none of it felt like victory. Inside the bedchamber, Janet slept fitfully under layers of furs, her breathing a shallow rasp that haunted every corner of his mind. Mira's words echoed without mercy. Months, perhaps less. He had conquered empires, slain ancient beasts, bent the will of alphas older than nations, but he could not conquer this. A low growl built in his chest, vibrating through bone and muscle until it tore free. A roar of pure rage aimed at the moon hanging cold and indifferent above the treetops. "You gave her to me," he snarled into the night, voice raw. "You let me feel her soul lock with mine, and now you take her? I will not accept it." Silence answered. Only snowflakes swirling in the torchlight. Arik's fists clenched until claws pricked his palms. For the first time in centuries, the Lycan King felt small. He turned and strode through the corridors, boots striking stone like war drums. Guards dropped their eyes as he passed. Even the bravest flinched from the storm in his gaze. He went first to the forbidden library beneath the keep, an iron-bound door sealed with blood runes. No one had entered in 200 years. Arik tore the wards apart with bare hands, ancient magic sparking against his skin like angry hornets. Inside, dust lay thick on shelves of crumbling tomes and rolled parchments. He searched through the night and into the gray morning, eyes burning, fingers stained with age-old ink. Every spell, every ritual, every whispered legend about transferring life force. He read them all. None were certain. All were dangerous. Most ended with both souls lost, but one fragment written in a language older than the pack itself spoke of a vessel strong enough to carry the sickness away. Immortal blood, willing heart, a price paid in full. Arik memorized every word. By midday he had summoned the 3 oldest healers in the kingdom, Mira and 2 silver-haired elders who had served his father's father. They gathered in the council chamber, faces drawn with worry. "Speak the ritual aloud," Arik commanded, "every step, every risk." The eldest, a woman named Celine with eyes like winter lakes, hesitated. "My king, the vessel must accept the sickness completely. It will live in them instead. And if their body cannot contain it—" "It will be me," Arik cut in, voice flat as hammered steel. The room stilled. Mira gasped. "You would trade your immortality? Your strength? The pack needs you." "The pack has a Luna now," he said. "They will survive. I will not survive without her." Celine studied him for a long moment. "The ritual requires a full blood moon, 3 nights from now, and it demands absolute consent from both souls. If her heart wavers even once, the transfer will fail, and take her instantly." Arik's jaw tightened. "She will consent." He dismissed them with a sharp gesture and returned to the bedchamber. Janet was awake, propped against pillows, a faint flush of fever on her cheeks. She looked impossibly fragile against the dark furs, but her eyes were clear and steady when they found him. "You look like you fought a war and lost," she said softly. He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside the bed, an action so unlike the proud king that Janet's breath caught. Arik took her hand in both of his, pressing it to his cheek. The gesture was raw, vulnerable, the mighty warrior laying his pride at her feet. "I found a way," he said, voice rough with exhaustion and hope. "A ritual, old, dangerous, but it can take the sickness from you and give it to me." Her eyes widened. "Arik, no." "Yes." He turned her palm up and kissed the center, lips lingering against her cool skin. "I am strong enough to bear it. I have centuries of life to burn. You have barely tasted yours." Tears gathered in her silver eyes. "And what happens when it kills you instead? Who protects the widows then? Who leads the pack? Who—" Her voice cracked. "Who will remember me when you're gone?" He rose onto the bed, gathering her carefully into his arms until she sat cradled in his lap, her back against his chest. His hand splayed over her heart, feeling its brave, faltering rhythm. "I will remember you in every breath I take," he murmured against her temple. "Even if those breaths are numbered. I have lived 1,000 years without meaning. You gave me meaning in a single night. Let me give you the years you deserve." Janet turned in his arms, small hands framing his face. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her gaze was fierce. You think love is sacrifice, she whispered. But love is also living. Promise me, if the ritual fails, if something goes wrong, you will keep living. For the pack, for the widows, for the man you are becoming because of this. His throat worked. Janet, promise me. The plea hung between them, fragile as frost. Arik rested his forehead against hers, eyes closing. I will try, he said at last, the words torn from somewhere deep. But know this. Every day without you will feel like dying slowly anyway. She pressed her lips to his then, not passion, but a quiet sealing of souls, a vow without words. He held her as though she were the only solid thing in a crumbling world, arms trembling with the effort of restraint. They stayed like that until dusk painted the windows purple. Later, when the fire burned low and snow tapped softly against the glass, a messenger arrived. A lone traveler had been sighted at the border, cloaked in shadow, riding a horse black as midnight. He carried no banner, spoke to no guard, but left a single message carved into an ancient oak at the edge of the territory. I know the ritual you seek. I can make it certain. But the price is higher than immortality. Arik read the words by torchlight, Janet asleep against his shoulder. His eyes narrowed. Higher than immortality. There were few things left that could claim such a cost. He crushed the parchment in his fist, gaze turning to the horizon where storm clouds gathered beyond the snow. Whatever the price, he would pay it. But as he carried Janet back to bed and tucked her against his side, her breathing thinner than the night before, a cold dread settled in his bones. 3 nights until the blood moon. And something ancient was already watching them. Chapter 5, Blood Moon Bargain. The storm arrived on the second night. Wind howled through the pines like a living thing, rattling shutters and snuffing torches along the keep walls. Snow piled against doors in heavy drifts. The pack stayed inside, huddled around fires, telling old stories of blood moons and bargains made beneath them. Arik had not slept in days. He stood at the window of the bedchamber, one hand braced against the stone sill, watching lightning flicker over the distant ridge. Behind him, Janet lay propped on pillows, her breathing a thin thread in the quiet. The fever had eased slightly, but the rattle in her chest remained, a constant reminder that time was bleeding away. The carved message still burned in his mind. The price is higher than immortality. He had sent scouts to track the mysterious traveler. They returned empty-handed. Whoever had left the warning moved like smoke. A soft cough pulled him back to the bed. Janet's eyes were open, silver and luminous in the firelight. You're thinking so loudly I can hear it across the room, she whispered. Arik crossed to her in 2 strides and sat on the edge of the bed, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the blaze in the hearth. I'm thinking about tomorrow night, he said. The blood moon rises at midnight. The ritual circle is already prepared in the sacred glen. Fear flickered across her face, quickly hidden. And the traveler? Gone. For now. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. It doesn't matter. I will do the ritual with or without his help. Janet searched his eyes. You're afraid? He started to deny it. Kings did not feel fear, but the lie died on his tongue. With her, he had no armor left. Yes, he admitted, voice low. I'm afraid of failing you, of watching the light leave your eyes and knowing I wasn't enough. Her thumb traced the calluses on his palm. You have always been enough from the moment you saw me in the shadows and called my name. Arik brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that lingered far longer than necessary. The simple touch carried everything he could not say. Devotion, desperation, the ache of loving someone mortality was trying to steal. I need you to promise me something, she said quietly. Anything. If the ritual takes your immortality and leaves you weakened, if the sickness begins to claim you instead, you must let me go peacefully. No second bargains. No darker magic. Promise me you'll live whatever years you have left. His jaw tightened. I can't. You must. Her voice cracked, but her gaze held steady. Love isn't only holding on, Arik. Sometimes it's knowing when to open your hands. The words struck deeper than any wound he'd ever taken in battle. He bowed his head over their joined hands, shoulders shaking with the effort to contain the storm inside him. "I will try," he said at last, echoing the promise she had drawn from him days before. "But I make no vows I cannot keep." Janet smiled through tears. "Stubborn king." "Your stubborn king," he corrected softly. They stayed like that until the fire burned low, her head eventually resting against his chest, his arms a careful cage around her fragile frame. He counted every breath she took, hoarding them like treasure. At dusk the next day, the night of the blood moon, the mysterious traveler appeared. No trumpet, no announcement. The stranger simply walked through the main gates as though the wards did not exist. Cloaked in black, hood shadowing a face carved from sharp angles and pale skin. Eyes the color of fresh blood gleamed beneath the hood. Guards tensed, hands on swords, but Arik had given orders. If the traveler came willingly, he was to be brought straight to the throne hall. The hall was empty save for Arik and Janet. She sat beside him on the raised dais wrapped in furs, looking small against the ancient throne but radiating a quiet authority that silenced even the wind outside. The traveler stopped at the foot of the steps and pushed back his hood. He was beautiful in a cold, unnatural way, features too perfect, skin too flawless. Ancient power rolled off him like mist. "I am Valerius," he said, voice smooth as spilled wine. "Once high priest of the old blood, keeper of rituals the moon herself has tried to forget." Arik's eyes narrowed. "You left the message." "I did." Valerius inclined his head toward Janet. "Your Luna's sickness is no ordinary illness. It is a curse woven centuries ago, punishment for a betrayal against the goddess. It cannot be simply transferred. It must be bargained away." Janet's hand tightened in Arik's. "What is the price?" Arik asked. Valerius smiled, sharp and joyless. "Your immortality is only the beginning. The curse demands a life for a life. But because you are Lycan King, bound by true mate bond, there is a loophole." He stepped closer. "You may take the curse into yourself. You will become mortal, yes, you will weaken, you will eventually die, but Janet will live, fully healed, fully human, with a natural lifespan." Arik felt Janet stiffen beside him. "And the rest of the price?" she asked, voice steady despite her pallor. Valerius turned those blood-red eyes on her. "When the king dies, whenever that day comes, his soul will not pass to the eternal hunting grounds with his ancestors. It will belong to the goddess, eternal service in her shadow realm. No rest, no reunion, alone forever." The hall seemed to grow colder. Arik did not hesitate. "Done," Janet gasped. "Arik, no, you cannot." He turned to her, cupping her face in both hands. "Listen to me. I have lived 1,000 years, fought 1,000 battles, ruled without mercy. I was empty until you. If I can give you 70, 80, 100 years of sunlight, of laughter, of children if you want them, of peace, I will gladly spend eternity in shadow." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "But you'll be alone. I'll have the memory of you," he said fiercely. "That is more than I ever deserved." Valerius watched them with unreadable eyes. "The ritual must happen at the peak of the blood moon, in the sacred glen. Both must consent fully, without reservation. If even a whisper of doubt remains, the curse will claim you both instantly." Arik stood, lifting Janet into his arms as though she weighed nothing. "We will be there." The glen lay deep in the ancient forest, ringed by standing stones older than the pack itself. The blood moon hung low and huge, painting everything in crimson light. Healers formed a circle. Valerius stood at the center, runes glowing on his arms. Arik laid Janet on a bed of white furs atop the altar stone. She reached for him immediately, and he went to her, stretching out beside her, their hands clasped tightly. Valerius began to chant in a language that hurt to hear. Power crackled in the air, thick, electric. The mate bond flared bright between them, golden light threading from Arik's chest to Janet's. Pain lanced through Arik first, a burning in his lungs, a sudden weight on his ribs. He gritted his teeth but did not let go of her hand. Janet cried out as the curse began to lift, warmth flooding her limbs, color returning to her cheeks, breath coming deep and easy for the first time in years. Tears of joy and grief mingled on her face. "I love you," she whispered over the rising wind. "Always." "And I you," he answered, voice strained but unwavering. "Live brightly for me, my Luna. The chant reached its crescendo. Light exploded outward, blinding white shot through with crimson. When it faded, Janet sat up slowly, whole and strong, eyes wide with wonder as she drew a full, unlabored breath. Arik remained beside her, breathing shallower now, a faint rattle already beginning in his chest. But he was smiling. The bargain was sealed. Valerius bowed once and vanished into shadow. Janet turned to Arik, tears falling anew, and pulled him into her arms. The blood moon watched in silence as the once immortal king held his healed mate close, feeling mortality settle over him like a cloak, and finding for the first time that he did not mind the weight. But far in the distance, thunder rolled through the sky was clear. The goddess had accepted her due, and something ancient stirred in satisfaction. Chapter 6. Between life and legend. The blood moon sank behind the ancient stones, leaving only the faint red afterglow on the snow. Janet sat upright on the altar furs for the first time in years without help, drawing one deep, effortless breath after another. Her lungs felt wide open, as though she had never known sickness at all. Color bloomed in her cheeks. Strength flowed into limbs that had once betrayed her at every turn. She was healed. And Arik, her fierce, unbreakable Arik, was paying the price. He still lay beside her, one arm curled protectively around her waist even now. But his skin had lost its immortal glow. The rattle that had haunted her chest for years now lived in his. Shallow, insistent, a quiet thief already stealing pieces of him. Janet turned to him, tears falling freely. You shouldn't have done it. His storm-gray eyes found hers, softer than she had ever seen them. A tired, radiant smile curved his mouth. I would do it 1,000 times again, he said, voice rougher than before, edged with the new weakness. Look at you, Janet. You're breathing. That's all I needed. She pressed her palm to his chest, feeling the once mighty heartbeat that had thundered like war drums now fluttering unevenly beneath her touch. The mate bond still burned bright between them, golden threads visible only to their souls, but it carried a new note, sorrow woven through the joy. Healers approached cautiously, ready to help him stand. Arik waved them off and rose on his own, swaying only slightly. Pride flashed in his eyes when he remained upright. He offered Janet his hand, and together they walked from the glen, her arm tucked through his, supporting him more than he would ever admit. The pack waited at the forest edge, silent, awed. When they saw their Luna walking tall and strong, a cheer rose, wild, grateful, disbelieving. When they saw their king pale and unsteady, the cheer faltered into worried murmurs. Arik lifted his free hand and silence fell. Your Luna lives, he declared, voice carrying despite the rasp. That is enough. Then he led her home through the snow, step by careful step. The days that followed were quiet and cruel in their gentleness. Janet discovered strength she had only dreamed of. She walked the widow cottages without tiring, laughed with children who now called her Luna with shining eyes, helped carry beams for new homes. Every breath felt like a gift she did not deserve. Arik watched her from windows or from chairs by the fire, pride and pain warring in his expression. He hid the worsening cough as long as he could, turning away, pressing a fist to his mouth, pretending it was only dust or cold air. But Janet knew. The bond told her everything. One night, a week after the ritual, the cough turned violent. He woke gasping, body racked with spasms that left him trembling and drenched in sweat. Janet held him through it, stroking his back, whispering soft nonsense until it passed. When it ended, he lay limp against her, head on her breast, breathing shallow. I'm sorry, he rasped. Don't you dare, she said fiercely, tears soaking into his hair. You gave me life. Let me give you comfort now. He slept eventually, exhausted, while she stayed awake counting the seconds between each labored breath. The next morning he refused to rise. Mira examined him gravely. The curse is settling deeper. His immortal body is fighting it, but mortality is winning. Weeks, perhaps, not months. Janet nodded once, face calm, heart shattering. That afternoon, Arik slipped into a fevered coma. Healers came and went. The pack left offerings of herbs and candles outside the chamber doors. Janet never left his side. She sat in the great bed, his head in her lap, reading aloud from old histories. Tales of battles he had won, kings he had outlived. Her voice stayed steady, even when tears fell onto the pages. On the third night of his coma, the room grew strangely still. Moonlight spilled through the window in a silver column, brighter than it had any right to be. The air shimmered. And suddenly Arik was there, standing at the foot of the bed, whole and strong the way he had looked the night of the moon dance. His eyes clear, his smile devastating. Janet's breath caught. "Arik?" He looked down at his sleeping body in her lap, then back at her. "A dream," he said softly, "or something close to it. The bond lets me come to you this way. For now." She reached out instinctively. Her hand passed through him like mist, but the bond flared warm and real. "I'm not ready to leave you," he said, voice breaking for the first time. "I thought I was. I thought giving you life would be enough. But watching you bloom while I fade, it's tearing me apart." Janet's tears fell faster. "Then fight," she pleaded. "Stay with me, we have years left, decades, I want them all with you." He knelt, ethereal, luminous, and rested his forehead against her knee even though he could not truly touch her. "I'm trying," he whispered, but the goddess's bargain was clear. "My soul is already marked for her realm. When this body fails, I go to serve. No rest, no reunion." The words hung heavy. Janet straightened, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Then we find another way. There is no other way." His voice was gentle but firm. "I made the choice freely. I'd make it again." She shook her head. "You made it alone. I never consented to an eternity without you." He smiled sadly. "Stubborn Luna." "You're stubborn Luna," she echoed, the old words now laced with grief. Silence stretched, filled only by the faint rasp of his real body's breathing. "I came to say I love you," he said at last, "and to ask you to live brightly. Laugh often. Let the pack love you the way you deserve. When you're old and gray, tell our story to the children, so they know what true strength looks like." Janet leaned forward until their foreheads would have touched if he were solid. "I will tell them," she vowed. "But I will also tell them how their king loved so fiercely he bargained with a goddess. And I will spend every day of my long life looking for a way to bring you back." Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly hidden. "Don't waste your years on impossible dreams." "They won't be wasted," she said. "They'll be spent loving you." The moonlight began to fade. His form shimmered. "Janet," his voice cracked. "I know," she whispered. "I love you too, always." He reached for her cheek, fingers passing through but leaving warmth behind. Then he was gone. The room returned to ordinary moonlight. Janet looked down at Arik's sleeping body, paler now, lips tinged faint blue. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, tasting salt from her own tears. "Hold on a little longer, my king," she murmured. "I'm not done fighting for us yet." Outside, the wind rose sharp and sudden. Far away in the deepest shadow of the forest, blood-red eyes opened. Valerius watched the keep from a distance, a slow smile spreading across his ancient face. The bargain was not quite finished, and the goddess was not the only one collecting debts. But in the chamber, Janet cradled her fading mate and felt, for the first time since her healing, a spark of fierce determination ignite in her chest. She would not let eternity take him. Not without a war. Chapter 7. The Cost of Forever. Dawn broke cold and colorless over the keep. Janet had not moved from the bedside all night. Her hand rested in Arik's, fingers threaded through his as though sheer will could anchor his soul to his body. The chamber smelled of healing herbs and beeswax candles burned low. Outside, the pack moved in hushed reverence. No laughter, no training yells, only the soft crunch of boots in snow as wolves came to leave flowers and silent prayers at the doors. Arik's coma stretched into its 5th day. His once bronze skin had turned ashen. The great chest that had risen and fallen like forge bellows now barely stirred. Each breath came slower than the last, as though even breathing had grown too heavy a task. Janet's eyes were dry, she had no tears left. Instead, a quiet fire burned in them, the same fire that had once made a king kneel. She leaned close to his ear. "You told me not to waste my years on impossible dreams," she whispered. "But you are my only dream, Arik. So if the goddess wants your soul, she'll have to come through me first." A soft knock sounded. Mira entered, face drawn with exhaustion. Behind her stood Celine, the eldest healer, clutching a leather-bound tome older than the stones of the keep. "We found something," Celine said quietly. "In the Forbidden Annex, a single page, torn from an even older text, It speaks of reversing a blood moon bargain. Janet's heart stuttered. Reversing? Celine hesitated. Not reversing, balancing. The goddess accepted a soul in service. But if another soul, freely given, equal in weight, offers itself in exchange, the bargain can shift. Janet went very still. You mean, if I give my soul instead? Mira shook her head fiercely. No, Luna, that is not. It's the only way. Janet cut in, voice steady. He traded his eternity for my mortal years. I can trade my mortal years for his freedom. Celine's eyes filled with sorrow. The page is unclear on what happens to the second soul. It may not grant you death. It may bind you to the shadow realm alongside him. Or worse. Janet looked down at Arik's face. Strong, even in weakness, the face she had come to love more than her own life. Then we would be together, she said simply. That is not worse. The healers exchanged a long glance. It requires the same blood moon circle, Celine said, and Valerius's blood to reopen the rite. He has not been seen since the first ritual. Janet stood, strength surging through her healed body. Then we find him. She did not wait for permission. She summoned the best trackers, sent ravens to border packs, offered rewards no king had ever matched. For 3 days the kingdom searched while Arik slipped further away. On the 4th day Valerius walked into the throne hall unannounced. The guards did not stop him, they could not. He looked exactly as before, beautiful, cold, ancient. Blood-red eyes fixed on Janet with faint amusement. You summon me like a common spirit, he said, voice smooth as midnight silk. I offer you a bargain, Janet replied without preamble. She stood alone on the dais, small but unafraid. Reopen the rite. Take my soul in place of his. Valerius tilted his head. And why would I do that? Because the goddess gains nothing from an unwilling servant, Janet said. Arik will fight her for eternity. He will rage and defy and never bow. But I would serve willingly if it means he walks free. Valerius studied her for a long moment. Something almost like respect flickered across his face. Interesting, he murmured. But the rite requires mutual consent. He must agree to let you go. Janet's throat tightened. He's in a coma. Then wake him, Valerius said simply. One last time. The bond is still strong enough for that. He stepped forward and placed a pale hand over Arik's heart in the bedchamber. Power pulsed, dark, cold, ancient. Arik's eyes flew open. He gasped, chest heaving as air flooded lungs too long starved. Color returned to his face in a rush. For a heartbeat he looked whole again, strong, vital, immortal. Janet, he rasped, reaching for her. She flew into his arms, burying her face against his neck, feeling the miraculous thunder of his heartbeat. He held her so tightly her ribs ached. But she welcomed the pain. Help, he began. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Valerius, one last gift. But it comes with a choice. Quickly, fiercely, she explained the torn page, the balancing rite, her offer. Arik's face went white. No, he said instantly. Absolutely not. Arik, I traded my eternity so you could live, not so you could throw it away. And I cannot live knowing you're suffering alone forever, she countered, voice breaking. Don't you understand? Every sunrise I see without you will be torment. Every laugh will taste like ash. His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. You are the bravest soul I have ever known, he whispered, but I will not let you pay this price. Valerius spoke from the shadows. The circle must be sealed by midnight tomorrow, new moon's darkest hour. After that, the king's body fails completely and his soul is claimed regardless. Decide quickly. He vanished as silently as he'd come. Silence fell. Arik and Janet clung to each other in the great bed, time slipping through their fingers like sand. Night deepened. Arik's strength began to fade again, the temporary awakening draining what little remained. His breathing grew shallow once more. Janet lay curled against his side, head on his chest, listening to the slowing rhythm. I used to dream of being seen, she said quietly into the dark. Of someone looking past the sickness and choosing me anyway. You did that. You gave me everything I ever wanted and more. Let me give you something back. He was silent for so long she thought he'd slipped away. Then his hand found hers, squeezing with surprising force. I'm afraid, he admitted. voice barely audible, not of the shadow realm, of a world without you in it. She pressed a kiss over his heart. Then take me with you. We'll face eternity together, side by side, like we faced everything else. Another long silence. Finally, a single tear slipped down his temple into his hair. Together, he whispered. Janet closed her eyes in relief and grief. Together, she echoed. Outside, clouds covered the stars. Inside, the Lycan King and his Luna held each other through the final hours, hearts beating in perfect, painful unison. But in the deepest shadows of the keep, Valerius smiled, a slow, sharp thing. The balancing rite required one more ingredient neither of them knew about, a betrayal, and the ancient priest had already chosen whose heart would break to provide it. Midnight approached. The circle waited, and fate held its breath. Chapter 8, When the Strong Fall. Midnight came too quickly. The sacred glen lay blanketed in fresh snow, the standing stone stark black against the starless sky. No moon tonight, only darkness thick enough to swallow sound. Torches ringed the circle, flames bending low in an unnatural wind. Janet and Arik walked the path from the keep together, hand in hand. She wore a simple white gown. He wore the black leather of a warrior going to his last battle. Neither spoke. Words felt too small for what lay ahead. Valerius waited at the center, runes already glowing crimson along his arms. His blood-red eyes reflected the torchlight like fresh spills. "You are both certain?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Janet lifted her chin. "We are." Arik's grip tightened on her hand. "Do it." They stepped onto the altar stone together. Valerius began the chant, older, darker than the blood moon rite. The air grew heavy, pressing against skin and bone. Power coiled like smoke. Golden threads of the mate bond flared between their chests, brighter than ever, as though protesting what was coming. Valerius raised a silver dagger, its blade etched with symbols that hurt to look at. "The balancing requires blood freely given," he said. "One cut each, then the exchange." Arik took the dagger first. Without hesitation, he sliced across his palm, deep enough that blood welled instantly, dark and thick. He turned Janet's hand over and pressed the blade to her skin. She did not flinch. The cut was swift. Their blood mingled as their palms met, sealing together in a grip that felt eternal. The chant rose. Pain lanced through them both, sharp, searing as the curse began to shift again. Janet felt the strength in her limbs waver, the old, familiar weakness creeping back like frost. Arik's breathing eased, color returned to his face. It was working. Tears slipped down Janet's cheeks, but she smiled through them. Arik's eyes, storm gray and fierce, locked on hers, filled with a love so deep it felt like drowning. Then Valerius's voice changed. A single word, ancient forbidden, slipped into the chant. The golden bond between them shuddered violently. Arik's head snapped toward the priest. "What was that?" Valerius did not answer. He simply smiled. The runes on his arms flared white-hot. Power surged, not balancing, but tearing. Janet cried out as the curse slammed fully back into her body, worse than before. Her knees buckled. Arik caught her, but his own strength faltered. The temporary reprieve vanished. Both of them sank to the stone together, gasping. Valerius lowered his arms. "The goddess does not accept substitutes," he said calmly. "She wanted the king's soul. A willing mortal cannot buy it back. The rite was never meant to succeed." Arik's roar of rage shook snow from the branches. "You lied." "I offered hope," Valerius corrected. "Hope is not a lie, it is a blade turned inward." He stepped closer, voice softening almost kindly. "The betrayal was required. One heart had to break completely for the circle to close. Yours, King Arik, broke when you agreed to let her sacrifice herself. That despair fed the rite. The bargain stands as it was." Janet clutched Arik's arm, her breathing already rattling again. "Then why bring us here?" Valerius looked almost sorrowful. "Because the goddess grows bored in her shadow realm. She wanted to watch love destroy itself trying to save the other. And you both performed beautifully." Fury and grief warred on Arik's face. He lunged, or tried to. His body, drained by the failed rite, betrayed him. He fell to one knee in the snow, dragging Janet down with him. Valerius turned away, Dawn will take him fully now. The coma returns, permanent this time. His soul departs at first light. He vanished between one heartbeat and the next. Silence crashed over the glen. Janet and Arik knelt together in the snow. Foreheads pressed, blood from their joined palms staining the white ground crimson. "I'm sorry," Arik rasped, voice breaking. "I should have seen the trap." Janet shook her head, tears falling onto his leather-clad shoulder. "We walked into it together, that's all that matters." His arms came around her, fierce even in weakness. "I wanted forever with you. We still have now," she whispered, "and now is enough." They stayed there until the torches burned low, holding each other as the cold crept in. When Arik's strength failed completely, Janet half-carried, half-dragged him back to the keep, calling for guards only when her own legs gave out. The pack found them in the snow just outside the gates, Luna supporting her king, both pale and bloodied but unbowed. They carried Arik to the royal bedchamber. He slipped back into coma as soon as the furs settled over him, deeper this time, peaceful in a way that terrified everyone. Janet refused to leave his side. Days blurred. The pack grieved openly now. Training ceased. Feasts were cancelled. Wolves gathered in the great hall to share stories of their king's conquests and, more quietly, of their Luna's quiet courage. Janet sat beside the bed, holding Arik's hand, speaking to him of small things. The widow children learning to read. The first snowdrops pushing through frost. The cloak she was embroidering with their mated mark. Sometimes she sang, soft, broken lullabies from her orphanage days. On the 7th morning since the failed rite, Arik's breathing changed. It grew slower, shallower. Mira entered, eyes red-rimmed. "It's time, Luna." Janet nodded once. She climbed carefully onto the bed, curling against his side the way they had slept every night since the festival. Her head rested over his heart, his arm, by instinct or final mercy, curved around her even in coma. The pack filled the chamber doorway, silent, respectful. Widows stood in front, hands clasped. Janet pressed her lips to Arik's ear. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for teaching me what it feels like to be loved beyond reason." His chest rose once, twice, then stilled. The mate bond snapped. Not painfully, gently like a golden thread cut by loving hands. Light flared softly around his body, warm and golden, then drifted upward and vanished into the rafters. Janet felt the absence like a hole punched through her soul. She did not cry out. She simply laid her head on his now still chest and let the tears fall silently. The pack bowed their heads. Outside, snow began to fall again. Heavy, peaceful flakes that covered the kingdom in quiet white. Hours later, when the chamber emptied and only candlelight remained, Janet sat up. She pressed one last kiss to Arik's cold lips. "I will live brightly," she promised the silent room. "I will tell our story, and one day, somehow, somewhere, I will find you again." Strength she did not know she possessed carried her from the bed. She walked to the balcony doors and threw them open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Janet lifted her face to the sky. Far away in a realm of endless shadow, a new servant arrived. Tall, proud, unbowed. The goddess smiled, expecting defiance. Instead, Arik knelt, not in submission, in patience, because he knew his Luna, and he knew she would come for him. No eternity was long enough to keep them apart. But in the keep, dawn broke over a kingdom in mourning, and the small, once-forgotten Luna stood alone on the balcony, silver eyes fixed on the horizon, already planning a war against fate itself. Chapter 9. War and Whispered Vows. The kingdom mourned for 7 days. 7 days of silence broken only by the wind through the pines and the soft fall of snow on Arik's grave. A simple stone cairn atop the highest hill, facing the sunrise he would never see again. Janet stood there every morning, cloak pulled tight against the cold silver eyes fixed on the horizon as though she could will him back by sheer longing. The pack watched from a distance, giving their Luna space, yet never far, ready to catch her if she fell. She did not fall. On the 8th day the ravens came, black wings against an iron-gray sky, carrying word from the southern border. The Iron Fang pack, old enemies Arik had crushed centuries ago, were massing. Their new alpha, a brutal warlord named Korath, had heard of the king's death. He smelled weakness. He was coming to claim the territory, the wealth, and the widowed Luna. The council gathered in the great hall, voices rising in panic. Without Aric's immortal strength, how could they hold? Some spoke of surrender, others of fleeing north. Janet entered without announcement. She wore black, simple, severe, but the mate mark on her throat caught the firelight like a living ember. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady. The frail girl who had once hidden in shadows was gone. "Prepare for war," she said quietly. Every head turned. "We do not surrender what Aric died protecting," she continued, voice carrying to the rafters. "We do not run. We fight. For the widows he redeemed. For the children he never got to hold. For the kingdom he loved enough to give his eternity." A murmur rippled through the hall. Doubt, then something fiercer. One old warrior, scarred from battles fought at Aric's side, stepped forward. "Luna, we are strong, but Korath brings 3 times our numbers. Without the king—" "We have something Korath does not," Janet cut in. "We have a reason worth dying for." She placed her hand over her heart where the severed bond still ached like an open wound. "And I will lead you." The hall erupted, not in argument but in fists pounding shields. Howls rose to the beams. Loyalty, raw and unwavering, flared bright. Word spread like wildfire. The small, once-forgotten Luna was taking the king's place on the battlefield. Preparations began at once. Forges burning day and night. Arrows fletched. Borders fortified. Janet trained beside the warriors, her healed body strong, her aim deadly. She learned strategy from Aric's old generals, pored over maps until her eyes burned, visited every widow cottage to promise protection. At night, alone in the royal chamber that still smelled of him, she spoke to the empty air. "I wish you could see them, Aric," she whispered to the dark. "They fight for you, for us." Sometimes she dreamed of him standing in endless shadow, watching her with proud, sorrowful eyes. He never spoke, but the bond's faint echo carried warmth across the void. The Iron Fang arrived on the new moon. Tens of thousands poured across the southern ridge, black banners snapping in the wind, war drums thundering like a second heartbeat. Korath rode at their head, massive, scarred, eyes gleaming with greed. The 2 armies met in the wide valley below the keep, snow churned to mud, breath fogging in the frigid air. Janet stood on the front line, clad in Aric's old armor resized for her smaller frame. His great sword hung at her side, too heavy for most, but her grip was steady. Korath laughed when he saw her, a deep, mocking bellow. "The little sick pup plays queen," he called across the field. "Come quietly, girl, and I might let you warm my bed before I take your lands." Janet's answer was to raise her sword. The battle began. It was chaos and blood and screaming metal. Wolves clashed in fur and fang. Arrows darkened the sky. The kingdom's forces fought with desperate ferocity, driven by love for their lost king and the Luna who refused to yield. Janet moved through the melee like vengeance given form, precise, relentless. She felled warrior after warrior, silver eyes cold, every strike carrying the weight of her grief. Korath sought her out. He barreled through the lines, shifting mid-stride into a monstrous black wolf, jaws gaping. He lunged for her throat. Janet met him head-on. Steel flashed. Claws raked. She took a vicious slash across her ribs, pain exploding white-hot, but rolled beneath his guard and drove Aric's sword deep into his chest. Korath staggered, shifting back to human form, eyes wide with shock. "You," he choked, blood bubbling on his lips. "A weakling." Janet leaned close, voice low and lethal. "I was never weak," she said. "I was waiting for something worth fighting for." She twisted the blade. Korath fell. The Iron Fang ranks faltered, then broke. Seeing their alpha dead at the feet of the small Luna in black armor, they turned and fled. Victory cries rose from the kingdom's wolves, raw, triumphant, disbelieving. But the cost was high. The valley ran red. Bodies lay thick in the snow. Janet walked the field afterward, helping the wounded, closing the eyes of the dead. When she found a young warrior, barely older than she was, dying in the mud, she knelt and held his hand until he slipped away. By dusk, she returned to the keep, bloodied and limping, ribs bound tight beneath her armor. The pack greeted her with reverence, kneeling as she passed, calling her Luna Eternal. She went straight to the royal chamber, dismissing the healers who wanted to tend her wounds. Alone at last, she stripped off the armor piece by piece, letting it fall with dull clangs. Blood seeped through the bandages at her side, but she ignored it. She crawled into the great bed that still felt too large without him, curling around his pillow that no longer carried his scent. Only then did she let the tears come. Great silent sobs shook her frame. Grief for the dead, for the kingdom's scars, for the unbearable emptiness where Arik's presence had once lived in her soul. "I did it," she whispered into the dark. "We held. They're safe because of you, because of what you taught me." She pressed her face into the pillow, breathing in the faint ghost of pine and leather that lingered. "I miss you so much, it's killing me slower than any curse." Exhaustion claimed her eventually, pulling her into uneasy sleep. In the dream, the shadow realm opened. Arik stood waiting, tall, proud, eyes shining with unshed tears. He could not touch her, but the bond flared golden across the void. "I saw," he said, voice rough with pride and pain. "Every moment you were magnificent, my Luna." Janet reached for him, fingers passing through mist. "It wasn't enough. Nothing feels like victory without you here." He smiled, sad, fierce, loving. "You are my victory. Live it for both of us." She woke with tears on her cheeks and a new resolve hardening in her chest. The war was won. But her war, the one against eternity itself, was only beginning. Far away in the shadow realm, Arik turned from the vision the goddess allowed him. He knelt again, not in defeat, but in strategy, because his Luna was coming, and no realm, no goddess, no bargain would stand in her way forever. But back in the blood-soaked valley, as the pack began the somber task of burying their dead, a single raven perched on Arik's cairn. Its eyes glowed faint crimson. Valerius watched through them, smile slow and sharp. The story was not over, and the final price had not yet been named. Chapter 10, The Final Wish. Years passed like pages turning in a slow, gentle wind. The kingdom healed. Scarred earth greened again. New homes rose where battlefields had bled. Children born after the war grew tall and strong, learning sword and bow alongside stories of the fierce king who gave everything and the quiet Luna, who refused to let his sacrifice be in vain. Janet ruled with a steady hand and an open heart. She walked among her people daily, no entourage, no pomp, listening to grievances, sharing meals in widow cottages, teaching orphans to read by firelight. The pack loved her not out of duty, but with the deep, abiding devotion reserved for legends who walk among the living. She never took another mate. The severed bond left a hollow no one could fill. At night, she climbed the hill to Arik's cairn, wrapped in the heavy black cloak he had once draped around her shoulders. She spoke to the stones as though he could hear, about the harvest, the new pups, the way snow still fell soft and silent on the anniversary of their festival night. Sometimes she dreamed of him waiting in shadow, patient and proud. In those dreams he never aged. She did, slowly, gracefully, silver threading her winter wheat hair, lines etching gentle maps around her eyes from years of laughter and quiet sorrow. On the morning of her 60th year, Janet woke knowing. Her body, strong for decades, felt suddenly heavy. Breath came shorter. A soft ache settled behind her ribs, the same place the curse had once lived. She was not afraid. She spent the day as she always did, walking the village paths, pressing a kiss to a newborn's brow, laughing with warriors now gray-haired themselves. At dusk, she summoned the council and named her successor, a fierce young she-wolf who had been orphaned in the Iron Fang War and raised under Janet's own hand. "You will lead them well," Janet told her. "Rule with mercy and teeth." The girl wept. The entire pack gathered outside the keep, sensing what was coming. Janet climbed the hill one last time alone. Snow had begun to fall, fat, lazy flakes drifting through the pines. The cairn stood unchanged, stones weathered but strong. She laid her palm against the coldest one. "I lived brightly," she said softly, voice steady. "I laughed often. I told our story to every child who would listen. They know your name, Arik. They know what love looks like when it is willing to burn the world down to keep one person safe." A soft cough shook her, gentle, familiar. She smiled through it. "I'm tired now," she admitted, "and I miss you the way the sky misses the moon in daylight, so I'm coming home." She sank slowly to her knees in the snow, the black cloak pooling around her like wings. The cold did not bite, it welcomed. Janet closed her eyes. The world faded to quiet. And then, Light. Not the harsh white of death, but warm golden glow. The same color as their mate bond once burned. She opened her eyes. She stood in the shadow realm, endless twilight, soft mists swirling, and there he was. Arik, unchanged. Tall and broad, storm-gray eyes fierce with unshed tears. He wore the same black leather from their festival night, royal markings dark against his skin. He stared at her as though afraid she might vanish. Janet, he breathed, voice cracking. She ran. He caught her, arms crushing her close, face buried in her hair. She felt solid, real. Young again, strong, the years of ruling and longing falling away like snow melting in spring. You came, he whispered against her neck. I told you I would, she answered, laughing through tears. Did you doubt me? Never. He pulled back just enough to cup her face, thumbs brushing her cheeks. But the bargain is fulfilled, a new voice said. They turned. The goddess stood nearby, tall, luminous, moonlight made flesh. Her expression was no longer cold amusement, but something softer, ancient, knowing. A soul freely given for love is the rarest offering, she said. You, King Arik, served without defiance. You, Luna Janet, lived a life that honored the sacrifice. Eternity in shadow is no fitting reward for such hearts. She lifted one hand. Golden light flared, brighter than any bond, warmer than any sun. The bargain is dissolved, your souls are free. The shadow realm dissolved around them like mist in morning light. They stood in a meadow under endless stars. Green grass, wildflowers, a gentle breeze carrying pine and jasmine. A place between realms, made for them alone. Arik looked at Janet, eyes shining. Together, he said. Forever, she answered. He pulled her close again, forehead resting against hers. In the living world, the pack found their Luna the next morning, kneeling peacefully at the cairn, snow covering her like a white cloak, a faint smile on her lips. She looked serene, younger somehow, as though sleep had smoothed away the years. They buried her beside him beneath the same hill, 2 stones now side by side, and on quiet nights when snow falls soft and the moon hangs full, wolves swear they see golden light shimmer between the cairns. They hear faint laughter carried on the wind, deep and rough, soft and bright, 2 voices intertwined. The kingdom thrived for generations, telling the tale of the fierce king who knelt for love and the quiet Luna, who conquered death itself to find him again. Children grew up believing true mates never truly part, not even eternity can keep them. And somewhere beyond the stars, in a meadow of endless twilight, Arik and Janet walk hand in hand, laughing, arguing, loving with the same intensity they carried in life. He whispers promises against her skin. She smiles and answers with vows of her own. No bargains, no shadows, only them, forever. The final wish was simple, spoken in Janet's last breath against the cairn stone. Let me go to him. And the universe, moved by a love that bent gods and broke curses, finally said yes. If this story shattered your heart, healed it, and left you believing in love that defies even death itself, don't keep it to yourself. Drop me in the comments if you cried. I know I did. Tell me your favorite moment. Was it when the ruthless king knelt for the forgotten Omega, his gentle promise in the firs, or Janet's final wish that broke us all? Share which part made you feel everything. Hit that like button if you need more soul-crushing, tear-jerking werewolf romances like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I drop new emotional fantasy love stories every week, and you won't want to miss the next one that destroys you in the best way. And if this love story touched you, share it with someone who needs to feel seen tonight. Because everyone deserves a king who would give away his empire, his immortality, and his eternity, just to hold them a little longer. Thank you for feeling this with me. See you in the next story.